this is Neil Sedaka with my favorite, Jimmy the Real Deal.
Great to have you with us, Bill Haley Jr., Tom Payton, my co-host. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jimmy. How you doing?
Fantastic. Great to have you with us. So excited about having you on the show. You know, I love your book, by the way. Crazy Man Crazy, the Bill Haley story. Tell us about putting this fantastic book together. I absolutely love it. Received it. It's so interesting. Tell us about putting it together.
Thank you. Well, yeah, Jimmy, I tell you, that was it was kind of a lifelong project for me. Really, it started when I was a college student. And I don't even remember social studies. And I don't even remember what the subject was, or the class. But I was instructed to write something biographical or autobiographical or whatever. And so I decided, let me write a little bit about my father, who was, a famous musician, obviously.
Right.
And that was the spark that lit the fire, I guess, to learning as much as I could. So the story is, my father, and you read the book, Jimmy, so you know this. So this is for your listeners. My father was maybe the biggest star in the world for about 2 years, mid 1954 to about mid 1956, and then Elvis and many others kind of captured the imagination. But for about 2 years, he was riding high, and obviously he had a tremendous career the rest of his life. He took rock and roll around the world, but in the early 60s, things started falling apart for my father in terms of his popularity in America, his business interests, and he also started drinking heavily. And he had some tax issues with the IRS. Somebody who was responsible for depositing payroll taxes failed to do so, but of course my father was responsible. So he had all these issues. And long story short, he moved to Mexico. And there's no pretty way to put it. He basically abandoned our family and really lost touch with him until the last couple of years of his life. So, I had dealt with some issues regarding feelings of abandonment, et cetera, having a famous father. And so this was writing about my father was an opportunity for me to learn as much as I could about him, his career, his life, and to understand more about, what happened in our family by learning about him as a person. So that was the beginning. And then I basically, over the next 40 years, did continuous research, interviews. I tracked down most of the musicians who played with my father, family members, business associates, managers, anyone I could who had any information about my father, and just conducted research for many years. And really didn't. Ultimately, I had a 160,000 word manuscript. I didn't know what to do with it. Wow. Now, in the meantime, I avoided performing my father's music for most of my life, even though I was besieged with opportunities to do so. For many reasons, I resisted that. But about 15 years ago, I was presented with I had a garage band. I was musical. I wrote songs, and we had an opportunity to go into a studio and record a CD of my original music. And we did a CD release party in a retail store, and the host of the party asked me if I could do some of my father's tunes. So I did with my garage bands, very poorly, but someone pulled out a cell phone of me doing rock around the clock and put it on, I guess, YouTube, one of those streaming services or whatever, video sharing services. And I got a call from a booking agent who said, if you can put together a band of professional musicians to do your father's music, I can get you some work and have some opportunities. So at that point in my life, I decided to go for it. And that's exactly what I did. I went out and found a bunch of musicians who were very skilled and very experienced at playing music from the 1940s, 50s, etc. That swing jump style, and put together a band. And lo and behold, we played all over the U.S. We got a tour of New Zealand in 2014. Amazing. I played in England 8 times, whatever it is. It's turned into a kind of a second career for me. And as a result of that, I was appearing in England and was interviewed for a magazine. And a literary agent in New York read the magazine article and contacted me and asked if I would be interested in writing a book about my father. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have a 160,000 word manuscript. So he has to see it. I sent it to him. He loved most of it, but of course he saw that it was too much and too scattered, et cetera, et cetera. And so he paired me with Peter Benjamin, a seasoned writer of mostly rhythm and blues artist.
Right.
A number of books about Motown artists, et cetera, et cetera. So Peter took my 160,000 words and was able to chop it up and get it in shape and down to the 80,000 words that the publishers were asking for. So we in 2019 it was published in the U.S., North America by Backbeat Books, and in the UK and globally by Omnibus Press, based in the UK. And that's the story how it came out. We actually did have even a movie deal for the book. But as you will recall, that was right around the time of COVID. So the book came out in 2019. We had a deal with a producer to make a deal with a studio. He had 1 year to make the deal with the studio. COVID hit. The 1 year anniversary came up, and he had to either renew it for another $8,000 or move on. And unfortunately, COVID had really shut down the independent film industry, so that did not happen. Wow. So at this point, the book is out. There is no movie for the book, but I am working on a documentary project, which is kind of related to it. So hopefully we'll at least see that come out in the next year or two.
Fantastic. The book, 40 years in the making, at least, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
A lot of hard work went into that book for sure. A lot of great stories. What I love about the book, so many personal stories about your dad. So much intimate stuff in the book, which is so fantastic. And it's hard to put down. Really. Especially if you're a fan of rock and roll, for sure.
Yeah. Well, they were very interesting times. My dad was really kind of that in between figure. So and I'm sure Jimmy, and Tom, you guys are very knowledgeable about music, and you know the way this whole rock and roll thing evolved. And it really started in New Orleans in the 1890s, and we had jazz and blues, and we had the Appalachian music turning into hillbilly and Western, and eventually country and Western. But my dad just happened to be that kind of figure who was there at the right time, right place. He was a hillbilly and Western artist. He loved country music. But because of his travels and because he was also a radio disc jockey, he was exposed to what we now call rhythm and blues music. It was then called race music, but it was music predominantly was only played for and on radio stations for African-American individuals. Mm-hmm. The records in white stores, and you didn't hear it. But because my dad, because he was a musician, because he traveled and he interacted with all kinds of musicians, including black musicians, and as a disc jockey, he had access to those records. He really loved the music. And even though this is the pre-civil rights era in America, we're talking 1949, 1950. Right. My dad was, as a hillbilly artist, he loved rhythm and blues music, and he had a band called the Saddlemen in 1950. Right. And they played 6 nights a week at the Twin Bars in Gloucester, New Jersey, and they played their hillbilly and Western music, and they had their hillbilly and Western fans. But as a joke, one night my dad decided to just play a rhythm and blues tune called "Rock the Joint" by Jimmy Preston and his Prestonians. Recorded on the Gotham label out of Philadelphia in 1949, and they would play it as the theme song of a 1-hour show on the radio station where my father was a program director. Oh, and wow! He loved that song, couldn't get out of his head, and as a joke, one night on the Twin Bars they went into it and thinking they'd be laughed off the stage, and instead of laughing, the sailors from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, who were the main patrons of the Twin Bars, jumped out of their chairs. They grabbed their girlfriends, they started dancing, hooting, hollering. And next thing you know, they were calling for that Rock the Joint tune every night, and it grew from there. And my father started experimenting more and more. But he was that transitional figure between rhythm and blues and country and Western before they came together. And he actually started experimenting and putting out records 4 and 5 years before the other quote unquote pioneers of rock and roll, like Elvis and Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and etc. And but the interesting thing, I'm going to just wrap it up with this point here. They were a hillbilly and Western band using steel guitars and traditional hillbilly or country instruments, and they were playing rhythm and blues music. But they also wanted to get kids dancing. That was really the key to why they were doing this. They were looking for a way to get kids dancing, and the light bulb went off. Not just my father, but his musical partners, Billy Williamson and Johnny Grandi. That the way to do that was to play rhythm and blues music. But the dance craze was, which had died out, had been so big in the 40s with the big bands, with the swing bands, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So my father really brought in the saxophone player, the jazzy guitar player, et cetera, from the big band sound.
Right.
And he mixed that into the whole country, rhythm and blues, but also the big band thing. And those three elements were really what created my father's sound in those early hit records: Rock Around the Clock, Shake, Rattle, and Roll, See You Later, Alligator, and a string of not so big hits, but very interesting records that they made from 1950 to 54.
Mhm.
And they're a mixture. And of course, after Rock Around the Clock was used on the soundtrack of The Blackboard Jungle in 1955,
Right.
and became the first #1 rock and roll record, the major record labels started realizing there's a gold mine in this new sound. And so they started looking for artists, and they would, brought in people like Elvis and Chuck Berry, Little Richard, et cetera, Gene Vincent. But none of them really had any interest in the big band swing thing. They were basically country guys, or in
Right.
Chuck Berry's case, a black individual who liked country music, but who were playing rhythm and blues music, black music. And so most people think rock and roll is just coming together of country and western and rhythm and blues. But the very beginnings and the first hit records were really borrowing heavily from big band sounds and swing and a little bit of jazz. And my father was right there at the cusp of all of it.
Right. Your dad really wanted to be a singing cowboy, right? And he got to work with Roy Rogers, which was amazing.
And initially, yes, and he was a great yodeler. Claimed to be the yodeling champion of Indiana. I'm not quite sure. That's a little tricky, because there was another Bill Haley who was a yodeler in the West, a lot older than my father. He actually was confused for him when the Down Homers hired him in 1946. But yes, his aspirations were to be a country and western star, and to go to the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. That was his aspirations.
Wow.
But by 1947, where he had been on the road and trying to make it, and been in a couple of bands, and it wasn't really happening, his aspirations were really shifting toward becoming a disc jockey. And that's where his head was at. And he might have, ended up having a career as a disc jockey. But of course, he still kept a band on the side. And back in those days with radio, they had, live music on the air, and the bands, there were house bands for the radio.
Right.
And so the band, they played, 6 nights a week, and they developed their sound. But yeah, my father was really wanted to be a country and western hillbilly and western artist. He loved that. His heroes were Gene Autry growing up, and Roy Rogers, as you mentioned, and Red Foley, and Hank Williams eventually.
Hank Williams. Didn't he even met Hank Williams at one point, didn't he?
He did. So in Pennsylvania, and sure throughout the country, they had these hillbilly jamborees, and they had these open air parks. So in this area, Pennsylvania, there was Radio Park out in Delaware, and there was one in Quakertown, but there were outdoor western parks. Right. And Hank Williams was on the circuit that would do those parks. So when Hank came to Pennsylvania, my dad met him, and sheepishly behind stage said, "Hey, Mr. Williams, I'm a big fan." And Hank, we probably was about the same age, but much more popular, encouraged him and took him under his wing a bit. And my dad showed him a few chords, sevenths, etc., and stimulated his interest in rhythm and blues music, my father would say. And so interestingly, later on, 1955, in October 55, when my father was on a tour, once again, we think of things as being totally clear cut and dry, but there's a lot of mixture of sounds in those days. My father was on a tour with Hank Snow,
really,
the Blue Ranger, right, as the headliner, with Bill Haley and the Comets were on the bill. Wow. And my father's manager, Lord Jim Ferguson, had an acquaintance by the name of Colonel Tom Parker, who called him up and said, "Hey, Jim, I got this young guy. I'm thinking of buying his contract out, and he's been on the Louisiana Hayride, and he's very good and very popular down here, but he hasn't really been out of the South and hasn't had much experience. Can you take him out on the road with you a little bit?" So for a period when they were in Oklahoma, young Elvis joined the show with my father. And the story is, my father saw the young Elvis came up after the show to my father and said, "I'm a big fan of yours, Mr. Haley. Crazy Man Crazy," one of my dad's records in '53, was very inspirational to Elvis when he was driving a truck. And that was one of the songs he said that inspired him. And my father looked at Elvis the way he recalled how Hank Williams had been so nice to him and so accommodating and so encouraging. And my father was kind of giving back and returning the favor with Elvis. That's kind of the story. He remembered the importance of being a good mentor. And so, And so, and my father and Elvis became, obviously friends, didn't see each other often, but that from that brief experience of a couple of weeks together, and then later in 58, which you read about in the book, when my father was maybe at the lowest point in his life, Elvis stationed in Germany and came backstage and just at the right time picked my father up when he was basically as down in the dumps as you could possibly get.
Right. So great friendship, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Tom Payton, what do you have?
Thank you. Bill, a question for you. I'd like to go back to the title of your book, Crazy Man Crazy. Now, is that based on conversations that your dad had with like teenagers after he performed, when he would kind of wander around the audience and talk to them and ask them what they thought about the music? And did somebody say Crazy Man Crazy? Am I correct in that?
You are. So what happened? So in 1952, when they were the Saddlemen, they'd been together for a couple of years, but they weren't really progressing. But they took on a manager who was also a radio personality, where my father was at WPWA in Chester. His name was Lord Jim Ferguson. And one of his first ideas for the band was to get them out in front of teenagers, because teenagers were the ones who are going to be buying the records. He had that foresight to understand that. And so he basically arranged for the band to play 183 engagements at high schools, whether record hops or whatever they were, usually after school, on top of having a radio show during the day and playing six nights a week. They did 183 of these shows for free. The purpose being, to your point, Tom, to really understand what the kids were looking for, to learn more. And after the shows, my dad would, the kids would always come up after the shows, even when they're loading their instruments, et cetera. And my dad would always say, "What do you guys think of the show?" And he would write down some of the phrases. And there were one show at Eddystone High School outside of Philadelphia, and there was one kid who came up, and my dad said, "What do you think of the show?" And I described the kid in the book as a tall kid with a ducktail haircut and suede bucks, and my brother was probably a beatnik, and he snapped his fingers. He said, like, "Crazy man, crazy," and it struck my dad as there's something to that phrase. So he wrote it down in ballpoint pen on his hand. And he went back to the apartment where he and my mother were living. Marshall Lytle, the bass player, went with him. Marshall would later claim that he co-wrote the tune, but I asked my mother, who was there, and she said Marshall was there, but no, Bill wrote the tune. But so my dad wrote the tune riffing off of that phrase, "Crazy Man Crazy."
Wow.
It was about a band that just rocks all night, drives you crazy. And they threw in the football cheer, "Go, go, go." So it was all about, Tom, to your point, to finding a way to get the kids engaged, get them interested. And to your point, they literally sought out and did their research to determine those phrases and what the kids thought were saying, what the sayings were, and what they thought was cool. Yeah.
Amazing. Not many people know that "Rock Around the Clock" was a B-side, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So with the success of Crazy Man Crazy, which was really the first rock and roll record, even though it wasn't called rock and roll then, to chart, it went to number 12 on Cashbox, number 13 on Billboard. So it was a national hit record in 1953. It was covered by Ralph Marty Area Orchestra and various others. But it was a hit, but nobody quite knew what to make of it. But it attracted the attention of the record companies to say there's something new coming. And as a result of the success of that record, Milt Gabler at Decca Records signed the band. And so the first recording session was scheduled for April the 12th, 1954 with Decca Records. Right. And the band, first of all, was late getting there. They got stuck on the sandbar. They took in the ferry across the Delaware River, got there a few hours late. When they got there, Milt Gabler, the legendary Milt Gabler, who had produced, Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong and Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five in the 40s, talk about big band or swing rhythm and blues groups. Milt Gabler really had a handle on this, what was going to be happening here. And he had a song called 13 Women and Only One Man in Town that he wanted the band to record. So that's why that was going to be the first session. So he brought the band in. They were a couple hours late. They didn't know the tune. And of course, back in those days, as you guys know, they didn't do overdubs yet. There was no isolation booths. So the whole band had to play the entire song beginning to end with no mistakes. And if they didn't get it right, they had to redo it. It took 7 tries to get 13 women and only one man in the can, which Milt thought would be the hit. And Decca thought. They had 45 minutes left in the session. And by agreement, the band got to choose the B-side of the record.
Wow.
Jim Myers, who negotiated the Decca contract on behalf of my father. Jim Myers was a Philadelphia area entrepreneur, had a small record company with Jack Howard called Cowboy Records. He had owned the publishing to this song called Rock Around the Clock.
Right.
He gave himself a writing credit for it, but he actually bought it for $500 from Max Friedman, guy who wrote Sioux City Sue, and gave himself a writing credit. And so because he helped my father get this deal with Decca, my father said, okay, we'll use one of your published songs on the B-side. So that song was Rock Around the Clock. So it was kind of a throwaway song as far as Decca was concerned. They did 2 takes and they were out of the studio. They released 13 Women and it sold like 20,000 records or something. It wasn't tremendous, but it was enough for Decca to say, okay, there's something to this band. They got a month later, they went back and they did another record with Decca called Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which became a seller and went to number 6 in 1954. So the band was off and running. But the B-side of that first record would pretty much have been forgotten. The disc jockeys didn't flip it over. But there was a kid by the name of Peter Ford out in Hollywood, whose father, Glenn Ford, was an actor, and he was working on a film based on the Evan Hunter novel called Blackboard Jungle about juvenile delinquency. And when the director of the movie, Richard Brooks, came over to Glenn Ford's house to go over the movie and the script, etc., at one point he said to Glenn Ford, he said, we're going to need to find a song to use on the soundtrack for this very shocking, controversial movie. And Glenn said, well, my son Peter's a big music fan, and he was a Haley fan. He bought Crazy Man Crazy and bought a lot of rhythm and blues records. So they went up to Peter's record collection and they picked 3 records out. One of them was Rock Around the Clock, because Peter didn't like 13 Women, but he flipped over and he played the heck out of Rock Around the Clock. That was a side that was up when they went looking. And of course, Glenn knew he could hear it playing constantly in his home. So he knew this was one of his son's favorite records.
Right.
That record, they took a record called All Night Long by the Joe Houston Orchestra and Big Joe Turner's version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Right. Went back to the studios, and they all agreed Rock Around the Clock would be ideal for this movie, Blackboard Jungle. Wow. So that movie was released in March of 1955, 11 months after it was recorded. It was recorded in April of 54, and forgotten about. But when the movie came out with that song opening the movie, and the theaters, this was very beginning of, the transition from 72 to 45 RPMs. Right. And movie theaters are starting to get some decent equipment. So kids had never heard anything like that rim shot and that sound when that movie came out. And then, of course, the movie had a huge impact as well. But it was the right place, the right time, just the cultural impact of that music, along with that point in time, coming into their own, finding their own, and going to these movies about juvenile delinquents. And it was the beginning of a cultural tsunami. It's just the right song for the right place, the right time. And the kids ran out of the theater, requested it on the radio, went to the record stores. And by July, it became the first number 1 record in rock and roll, even though they still called it Foxtrot with vocal chorus. If you look at
Yeah.
The term rock and roll was being bantered around, obviously, by 53, 54 with Alan Freed, but it really wasn't attached to the music until late 55. 1956 was really the year where rock and roll became mainstream. Right.
Sam Phillips produced a song called Rocket 88. Your dad redid the song. Tell us about that, and it hit pretty well for your dad.
Yeah. So the story on that is so before Sam Phillips had Sun Studios, as a matter of fact, the money he made on Rocket 88 allowed him to create Sun Studios.
Right.
But he had a recording service, and then he would lease the tracks to other record companies. So he brought in Ike Turner and the Kings of Rhythm for a recording session. This was in 1951. And Ike's baritone sax player, Jackie Brenston, had this tune, which was really kind of a copy of another tune. And that's a lot of that happened. But the tune was called Rocket 88, about the Oldsmobile Hydromatic Rocket 88, the baddest car out there.
Right.
And so Sam recorded that tune, and they sold or leased those tracks to Chess Records in Chicago. And it was released as Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. Okay. Now, the Chess Records representative went out, and he was selling a lot of records in the black record stores of Rocket 88, but he couldn't get that record into the white record stores for obvious reasons. This is 1951.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, segregation is particularly in the South, but even in the North, white record stores didn't see any profit in it because they didn't have, they didn't sell to a black audience. So there was this fellow by the name of Dave Miller who was starting a new record label called Holiday Records in Philadelphia. And he just happened to be down in the Washington, D.C. area in Virginia, having lunch at a lunch counter. And he sat next to a guy who was the representative of Chess Records. And they struck up a conversation. And Miller said, yeah, I'm starting a record company. I'm kind of on the road out here looking for talent. And this guy says to Dave Miller, he goes, well, I got this record. It's called Rocket 88. It's by a black group. And it's just tearing it up in the race records markets. But it's a darn shame I can't get it in the white record labels. And I don't know if he was joking or he was serious, but he said to Dave Miller, if you could find a white artist to cover this record, it might, turn out pretty good for you. So Dave Miller, right, he took a copy. This is before, Sam Phillips had the idea of bringing a white kid in to sing black music.
Right.
Dave Miller came back to Philadelphia. He made some phone calls, and one of his friends, Jack Howard, said, yeah, my friend Bill Haley at the Twin Bars, he's doing that kind of thing. He's covering Rock the Joint, and he's doing, he's covering these rhythm and blues tunes. And so Dave Miller went over there and at Twin Bars, and he said, my dad, Bill, I'll give you $25 to make a record. That was a lot of money in 1951.
Yeah.
He's living on peanut butter and coffee, pretty much. I'll pay your side guys $15. And the story is, my dad was a little reluctant at first because he did not want to alienate his followers of hillbilly music, but his partners, Johnny Grandy and Billy Williamson, the steel guitar player in particular, encouraged him. And he said, what do we got to lose, Bill? And so they went in and they did record it. And actually they did. They didn't like how it came out the first time. They went back in the second time, but basically they went to a radio station and recorded it on acetate. But they released it on Holiday Records, and Dave Miller purposely did not put any photos on the record. But Rocket 88 by Bill Haley and the Saddlemen.
Wow. And
they got it into some white record stores, and it sold like 10,000 copies in the Philadelphia area and started selling in Baltimore, New York. And actually, interestingly, and I didn't put this in the book, but I did, but it got taken out. Even in Chicago,
wow,
they heard it, Rocket 88.
Wow.
And there was a blues jazz club in Chicago based on that record that hired the band to come out and play, thinking they were black. Or they played black like music. And it was the same. Louis Armstrong had just finished there. Okay. Bill Haley and the Sun were the next act. And they went out there and did all their hillbilly tunes, and they got booed out of the place by mainly black patrons or jazz aficionados because people didn't know what to expect. But this music, this record was this crossover sound that nobody knew if it was white or black, kind of.
Right.
So it was a regional hit, and in some urban areas like Chicago it hit, but mainly Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, those areas. It was at 1951, and then they just kind of, based on that very mild success, they continued recording with Holiday, which became Essex. Wow. And they did a series of very interesting experimental records over the next 3 or 4 years until they signed with Decca and did Rock Around the Clock, where one side would be a weepy country and western hillbilly tearjerker, and the other side would be a pseudo rhythm and blues kind of
right,
boogie or whatever. And they were just trying to throw everything out there to come up with the sound that's going to catch the imaginations. And then, of course, as you mentioned earlier, Tom mentioned, or I think I forget who mentioned, "Crazy Man Crazy" became a national hit. Jimmy, you mentioned that. That was the process. But yes, it was those records. Each record with a certain small degree of success pushed them a little further toward what ultimately would become a sound that would be capture the imagination of first the United States and then the world in 1956, 57, 58. The rest of the world caught on to rock and roll.
Yeah, another one of my favorites is "See You Later, Alligator."
Yeah.
Tell us about that song. How did that come about? And tell us about the success that your dad had with that song.
So that was a song that was written by I'm trying to remember his name now. Bobby. He was a Haley fan. He was in New Orleans.
Mhm.
Yeah, and he even had a little curl. My dad had that Kiss curl.
Yeah, your dad had the curl in the front.
The curl was really not initially a fashion statement. It was something that evolved as his attempt to distract attention from his blind eye.
Yes.
Right. Mhm.
But because he had it, and gosh, I wish I could remember the name of this guy who wrote the song. Because he was such a fan of my father's, he had his own curl, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. But Milt Gabler, the producer at Decca, heard the song and he knew that would be perfect for Bill Haley in the comments. But the problem was this was 1955. This was Christmas time, late December.
Mhm.
The Pythian Temple, where the Decca recorded the comments and other acts, was closed for the holidays. But Gabler wanted to get this record out before somebody else had a hit with it. So he called the band into the administrative offices in Decca over the Christmas holiday. And they went in on a Saturday and they got there. And then Milt realized that he forgot. He left the words and the music to that song in his office and he left his key at home. So he had to borrow a hammer from the super and break into his office in Manhattan. And so they recorded it. And of course, on Monday when they came in, the police were there and his secretary was having a heart attack. But Milt explained, I broke in and I'll pay the fine for having you come out because I think we got a hit here. And sure enough, it became a multi-million seller. It was the third gold record that the Comets received. And it sold around 3 million copies, I believe. And really came out in December of 55. And so 56, it was a huge record. Yeah.
What a great song. Last summer I took a trip to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And one of the highlights for me, as soon as you walk into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, go into the first room, your dad's guitar is like right there in a case. Was the first thing I took a picture of. I'm like, wow, check this out. Tell me about that guitar. You have any history behind that guitar?
So that's the Gibson Super 400. And that I was there in 2014 when my father was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame the second year. It was 1981 or 2, whatever it was. But the band members weren't inducted then. But in 2014, the other band members were inducted. So I went for that ceremony. His guitar wasn't there then. They had the guitar of Danny Cedrone, the guitar player on Rock Around the Clock, was there.
Right.
But my half brother Pedro, from my father's third marriage, about 3 years ago, I think, he lent that guitar to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But before he did that, he lent it to Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats.
Oh, wow.
Who played it at a show. It's on YouTube. But he got to play it. But it's a Gibson Super 400. So what happened was Gibson lent those guitars to the Comets. And to Franny Beecher, the lead guitar, I think it was eventually a Les Paul. I'm not sure what it was before that. And my father had a black Gibson L7 or L5 before that, and that was stolen. It was in a truck with all the equipment out in a hotel outside Chicago. The truck was stolen, so they lost that one.
Right.
But he still had the Super 400, which he played most of his career. And I guess luckily they never came for it because Franny Beecher, who was the guitarist, not on Rock Around the Clock, Danny Cedrone was, but Danny died of various stories. He fell down a flight of steps. Some say it was a heart attack. Some say it was more mob related issue.
Gotcha.
He might have had some help going down the steps, possibly, but he died about 6 weeks after recording Rock Around the Clock. Wow. But Franny Beecher became the guitar player in the Comets. He was given Gibson guitars too. And I got to know Franny before he passed away about 5-6 years ago. And he told me the story that one day, I don't know if it was the 1990s, the 2000s, a Gibson van pulled up in front of his house and came and said, "Hey, we're here to pick up the guitar." And they took it back from him. So, I'm assuming the same thing with the Gibson Super 400, that Gibson lent it to my father.
Right.
but they never took it back. So Pedro, my half brother, as I mentioned a few years ago, I'm sure he's loaning it. I don't think.
Yeah.
To Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome though. I was first thing I took a picture of when I walked into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So excited to see it. Do you own any of your dad's guitars or any memorabilia or mementos of your dad's career? Do you have anything?
Well, I have the gold record of Rock Around the Clock. That would be
cool.
my prized possession. Yeah.
Okay.
I have some Cashbox Award trophies. I have lots of like programs. A lot of photographs, family photographs, et cetera, some of which were in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I could kick myself, but I did have at one point, and this was the first guitar I ever played when I was learning, was my father's old, and I don't even know the make of it. It was an acoustic guitar, big, thick neck, nylon strings. And that's when I decided to learn the guitar, which was basically, self-taught, just, get a book of Beatles tunes. And okay, here's how I make a C chord. Here's how I make an F. Here's a D chord. That's how I learned. That was a guitar I learned on. And then eventually I got other guitars. I do not know what happened. And it's crazy, you would think. But, I just didn't understand the value of it as a teenager. I don't know if I left it behind when I moved.
Right.
Or horsing around and broke it. I cannot remember for the life of me what happened to it. Of course, it will be worth a fortune now.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. But so I did have a guitar. I don't. I do have the gold record of Rock Around the Clock, which is
that's so awesome. That's great.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. We recently went to a show, Tom and I, and we met Bill Turner. He's one of the Comets. I guess you know Bill.
Yes.
Oh, cool. Now, there's been quite a few Comets, right? I mean, tell us how your dad came up with the name, the Comets.
So they were the Saddlemen,
right?
And they were playing hillbilly and Western music, but more and more they were playing rhythm and blues music. And it was actually when Crazy Man Crazy became a national hit record, as I mentioned, went to number 12 on Cashbox. It was right around that time. It's actually a little before that, but so Crazy Man Crazy was recorded, I believe, in March of 53, but in late 52, they were already more rhythm and blues oriented than not. And it was actually Sam Scrow, who was a friend of Lord Jim's, who suggested they get out of the cowboy outfits if they want to get into nightclubs. My father was offended by that because this is what we do. But eventually realized the wisdom of that. It would get them more work. So they got rid of the cowboy hats and shaved the sideburns and the boots, started wearing tuxes. And right around that time, someone at the radio station suggested the name change to the Comets.
Wow.
It was either Bix Reichner, who I think was kind of a promo man radio guy, or another guy. There are two different versions of who suggested it. But it was suggested to him to change the name to the Comets. It was a riff on Halley's Comet, but people mispronounced it anyway as Haley. And of course, obviously, it was more of a name, more fitting the image of a hip rhythm and blues band than Saddlemen, which was clearly a hillbilly name. So that was what was behind the name change, and so through the years there have been many musicians who played with my father and were Comets. Bill Turner played with him in the 1970s, and when I started my band, actually, Bill was a part of my band initially.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And a great guy, and we did well together, but we ran into some issues with conflicts of scheduling, and it was actually when we were scheduled to go to New Zealand. And Bill had another obligation, so he didn't go with us. So here we were almost a month on the road playing without him.
Mm-hmm.
And, we did, with 5 mouths to feed instead of 6. And the audience loved it. So it just kind of, it just went that way. It wasn't, there was no ill feelings. It just, what they say, there's a saying that 99% of everything is showing up. So, but if you're not there, it just kind of, we just continued on as a 5-piece. And I actually, after that, did use Bill occasionally to fill in when my guitar player couldn't make it. So, we're on good terms, and I love and support Bill and what he's doing. He's got the Blue Smoke Band. He's still working out there.
Still
Mhm.
working.
And, yeah, keep the music alive.
Absolutely. I know you played so many places, right? I mean, you played the UK, you played all over the States. One of the places that you did play was the Surf Ballroom. Tell us about that. That must have been very historic for you to do that.
Yeah, we actually played there twice, and it's a very special place. It's very obviously because of the history, and in particular that one momentous night, the day the music died, the Winter Dance Party.
Right.
And actually, I think both times we played there, it was kind of not a reenactment, but it was a tribute to that particular show, 50 show. So yeah, it's a very, I don't know if you've been there, but it's
I've never been there. Yeah. It must be like a museum, I'm sure, with a lot of pictures and
kind of like a museum. So the whole lobby area extends, and there's a breakout room from the lobby area, just lined with photographs, walls.
Wow.
They have the original phone booth where I guess they made their last calls before.
Oh,
the trip.
wow.
Oh, wow.
One of the shows I was there, Tommy Allsap, who was in the band with Buddy Holly,
Mhm.
who was one of the guys who lost the coin flip. So you know this coin flip story, right?
Right.
Well, there's actually two coin flips. So Waylon Jennings lost to I don't know if he lost it to Buddy, or I don't know if there was two seats left. Buddy was going to get a seat no matter what.
I know Welling was one for sure. Yeah.
Right, and Waylon won, but Tommy Allsop was the other guy. I don't know if he
Wow.
lost the coin flip to Richie Valens or to the Big Bopper, but met Tommy and got to hear his stories too. And then of course, and it's the same with in this area, Sunnybrook Ballroom, where you play on stages where your heroes or in my case, my father too, played. It's a special feeling. You can feel the spirit of them there. And Surf Ballroom was the same. I mean, I'm on the same stage where, Buddy played and Richie Valens and,
Yeah.
and then the other really beautiful thing, and this is what I like about England too, in particular, is that audience, the Surf Ballroom audience, is very, very knowledgeable and very into it, and they know even the obscure songs. Like a lot of places we play, people know the hits, and they like the music, but there's just like a little something extra when the people are just totally into it and they know every song. You can just feel their excitement, their energy, and their interest. It's very riveting and very very satisfying as
Sure.
as a performer.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very special place. And I did not make the trip to go out to the gravesite.
Right. Okay.
Because I didn't have time, because both times I was there, it was very cold.
What's it called?
Very cold, man. Holy cow, in February. But yeah, hopefully we'll get back there again.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite place to play?
Wow. I can't really say a favorite place. I mean, they all have their ups and downs. I prefer more when we do more of the theaters in this, more controlled environments. I mean, we'll do outdoor shows, car shows. We've done big outdoor stages like the Strawberry Festival in Florida every year, and that's fun too when you have a huge audience and you feel that energy. But there's something even just more satisfying about playing in maybe a 300 to 500 seat theater, where you can hear people's reactions to the music.
Sure.
And I tell stories between the songs. And I can hear the gasp or the chuckle or you get that connection in a smaller venue. So I would just, not one in particular, but smaller theaters are my favorite for sure.
Sure. I know we are very excited about you coming back into town, the New York City area, the Lehman Center in the Bronx, Sunday, May 18th, on the bill. Bill Haley Jr.'s Comets, Bobby Wilson, my friend, the Claudettes are going to be there, right? Tom?
Yeah.
Chiclets? The Chiclets? Is that the Chiclets? Oh, yeah, great.
Jay Siegel's Tokens, also Clyde McFadden's Drifters, the Coasters, Vinny Medunia is going to be there.
Right.
Chiclets, of course, as I mentioned. And of course, you, Bill Haley's Junior's Comets. So we are excited about you being back in the New York City area, of course. And are you excited about coming into this area? How often do you get to play New York and New Jersey, around the Pennsylvania area?
Yeah, a few times a year. So this show, So this is a little different. So normally we go out and we do our 90-minute plus show wherever we go. You know, it's us. But I'm not gonna say that often. Maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year we do a show with this group of musicians. So the Coda Band. Pete Mastropolo he's the drummer and the leader of that band, but he's also involved in booking and so he hires us for these kind of things. So we played with some of these like Bobby Wilson, Jackie Wilson's son. He's fabulous. He's usually on these shows.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Frankie Pizarro, the ex singer from the Platters, is on it. So there's many acts on the show. So basically, we do 20 minutes. So
nice.
So we're just going to be doing Rock Around the Clock, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Celia Alligator, a couple of other the big hits, the familiar ones. It's not our full 90-minute show, and I don't have time to tell stories, and even usually when I do my 90-minute show, I also bring a PowerPoint presentation of about 450 photographs and a little video introduction. So I make it a multimedia thing. So we won't have any of that at this show, unfortunately. It'll just be us coming out and banging out 20 minutes of high energy rock and roll. Wow. My sax player is incredible. He's worth the price of admission himself. And I have a different guitar player coming this time. Who's really, really good rockabilly guitar player. It'll be the first time he's played with us in this band. So we'll put on a great show, but it's only gonna be our 20-minute show. It's not our full 90-minute treatment with the whole rock and roll history show. But there's lots of great acts, so it's gonna be nonstop action and lots of fun for everybody.
Yeah, Bobby Wilson and the Chicklets were on my show. They're both great acts. We had such a good time with both of them. And of course, again, it's the Lehman Center in the Bronx, Sunday, May 18th. For ticket information, you can call 914-725-0011 or the box office at 718-960-8833. And that's for that fabulous show coming up with Bill Haley Jr.'s Comets and all those great acts. So awesome.
It's gonna be
tell us about the book. Tell us about the book and how did you get the book?
So the book is it should be available in Barnes and Nobles, most bookstores. If it's not, you can ask for it, but you can get it on Amazon very easily, or the publishers, Omnibus Press, Backbeat Books. I'm sure they have websites too, but it's pretty much available because they're established publishers. They have shelf space in bookstores, so you should be able to get it maybe not a small bookstore, but they could order it very easily. The easiest way is just to go on Amazon and search for Crazy Man Crazy, the Bill Haley story, Bill Haley Jr. It'll come up. And you probably get a used copy if you want to get it cheap. It's not going to help me. It's easy to get. Yeah. They're out.
Hey, Bill,
I some of my shows too. So
Tom Payton's got some questions for you.
I got one more question for you, Bill. Has the book helped you to gain a kind of a deeper understanding about your father, or have you gained some insights about him, or do you understand him a little bit better, or how has it kind of helped you to
absolutely
understand what his life was like? And I know, obviously this trauma and tragedy here, you were left as a 7-year-old, but has it offered any peace to you in some sense, or healing?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. And that was really the whole, that was my aspiration in researching the book is to get to a place. And it absolutely did that. So in a number of ways, talking to my mother in particular, who's a large part of the book, and fellow musicians, businessmen, just understanding the details and the challenges that my father faced and how difficult it was. I mean, we take it for granted now, but you got to remember when my father was a white hillbilly musician playing black music, a lot of people didn't like that.
Sure.
They put, and so he faced a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles. And, it's very admirable to understand that part of his character, which I was not aware of. Number one. Now, number two, once I accepted this opportunity to go out and perform his music, and in particular, when I went on that tour of New Zealand and I was gone for a month, it really hit home to me what it must have been like for my father to be world famous, on the road 40 plus weeks per year, and to still maintain that affection, that connection with your family. I took it too personal, like I was abandoned by my father when I was younger. And of course, I've come to realize as a result of this experience and my own maturity and growth as a person, that there's a much bigger picture, and that, under the circumstances, my father is really blameless for what happened because that's the way it is. So
Right.
not only even beyond all that now, even now I have instead of negative feelings, I have admiration, I have understanding, I have acceptance.
Mm.
But beyond all that, one thing I did not expect when I did this was I knew, okay, it'll be fun. I'll get to travel a little bit. I like to sing, et cetera. So it'll be fun, make a few bucks. But the greatest thing about all this, and I never anticipated it, was feeling the reaction of the audience and how much this music impacted them in a positive way.
Mhm.
And after every show, we like to meet the audience. And I say, what do you think of the show? And every single time people say, boy, I love this music. And tell me a story where they were, when they first heard Rock Around the Clock and what this music meant to them and how much joy it brings. And I just feel so much love and appreciation for my father and his music from
Mhm.
people that I vicariously get to enjoy that. And that's very healing and therapeutic in its own right.
Sure.
And
sure.
so, whatever sense of resentment I had or lack or whatever has been totally wiped away by this experience of learning as much as I could and then vicariously experiencing what it must have been like for my father
Sure.
as a
Wow.
professional.
That's powerful. It really is.
Yeah. I got a question here from a good friend of mine listening in Las Vegas. His name is Michael. I call him Ziggy, and his dad, Tom. Big fans of your dad, big fans of yourself. Are you coming to Las Vegas anytime soon?
I don't have anything on the books. We've done a number of shows at the Sun Coast, which is on the north end of town now.
Sure, I know the Suncoast. Sure.
Yeah. It's been a few years, so I think we're due. I don't, the thing with this music is it's now 70 years old. And the primary audience were people who were teenagers in the 50s, and now they're in their 90s, 80s and 90s. They don't come out as much. And so we kind of transitioned. We were doing a lot of like night shows before. Now we're doing a lot of like matinee shows. So I don't know if that affects the in Vegas, those casinos. There's still there's got to be a lot of singers out there anyway. So you would think
Right.
there's still a market for what we do out there.
Oh, I'm sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hopefully my booking agent will get us in there. Now I know there's a show at the Orleans in Vegas every year, the Viva Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
It's all rockabilly music, and it's run by a guy named Tom Ingram, and I believe he's from England. Because when I go over to England, it's a whole different circuit of the rockabilly scene. They have their own, it was huge there in the late 80s and early 90s as opposed to here, and that's still strong. I would think our band would be a perfect fit for that, but we have not been able to crack that and get out there.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's because they want to stick with their English bands that they use. I'm going to leave that open as a possibility. I know my booking agent has tried to contact them to get us into Viva Las Vegas. But hopefully we'll get back to the Sun Coast because we went over very well there both times we went, and it's been about 3 or 4 years. So thanks for the suggestion. I'll run it by my booking agent later on today and tell them.
Absolutely. Any favorite memories of your dad or anything that you'd like our audience to know about your dad that most people don't know about him?
Well, he was a regular guy at home. I mean, of course I was very young, but he was very caught up in his career. But I have maybe one of my fondest memories is as a 5-year-old or 6-year-old wandering into the garage where the band would practice, and my dad would stop everything, and he would go grab a cardboard box and get some drumsticks and set me up and get me to play along with the band. And I always remember that as feeling like, wow, I'm included in the comments,
Yeah.
He would every summer we would go down to the Jersey Shore, whether it was Wildwood or Stone Harbor.
Right.
The band was usually had some kind of summer engagement, so we got to spend a lot of time with them then. And I remember being a kid sitting on his shoulders, walking around the boardwalk, and there are a lot of small memories, and then maybe some that aren't so happy, but he was a regular guy. I mean, like everyone else. It's just that he was away from home so much; it was hard.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, Jimmy, you know this from the book. Alcohol became a big part of my father's life, and so when I eventually did reestablish contact with him the last year and a half, it was very difficult because at that point in his life, he really was in the later stages of chronic alcoholism, and most of our conversations were very late at night and mainly monologues on his part. It was hard to communicate with him at that point. We did have a few good moments there and some bad ones, but you know, you don't choose your parents. It is, you know, it's just always been what it is, you know. And I never even thought of my father as being famous until, or understood what was going on until I was maybe 9 or so, and I became a big Beatles fan. And
Really?
I remember my mom saying, "Oh, your dad knows them or something." You know, yeah, he didn't. But they were, you know, because they were in the same. Like my dad played the Star Club in '63.
Right.
The Beatles were there, you know, 4 months before him, kind of thing. But then I kind of dawned on me what was going on, and kids would say things to me as a kid, like, "Oh, you know, Little Richard found God." Like, you know, like their parents told them rock and roll was bad, and so they're kind of, you know,
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? And I realized later, of course, my father was Bill Haley, rock and roll, okay. But you know, as a kid growing up, you don't really get it until you get a little older, and then honestly, I didn't really, you know, appreciate what my father did until I became a teenager and then started doing the research and listening to the records. And then became a big music historian myself. I mean, going back and listening to everything, I mean, you know, really digging into the big bands, going back to 1890s and then going forward to the 50s, you know, and then realizing my father's place. The more I learned, the more I understood, the more impressed I became with him and what he did and what he accomplished. And also, once again, more understanding of why what happened, you know, and it's not personal. There are bigger things involved. Yeah.
Right. I have to, before I let you go, I just want to ask you about Happy Days. Your dad was alive when Happy Days hit the air, right? It was around 74. Rock Around the Clock, of course, the opening theme.
Right.
How did your dad feel about that? Was there a big resurgence with the song at that time or with his career?
Yeah. So at that time, so it was actually the movie American Graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Came out using Rock Around the Clock on the soundtrack. And then if not a direct spinoff, at least inspired by, facilitated by the success of American Graffiti, the TV show Happy Days, where they used Rock Around the Clock. But my dad had been really kind of the leader of a rock and roll revival that really started in 1966 in France, and then 67, 68 in England, 69. And then 69 and 70 in America. Richard Nader put on the Rock and Roll Revival Tour with my father in 1970, 71. Right. So when American Graffiti and Happy Days came out, he had already been riding this revival.
Oh, wow.
For 4 or 5 years. Rock Around the Clock actually recharted in England, in like a top 10 in England, and went up to number 1 in France or something. So by the time it was used on Happy Days, he had already been enjoying that resurgence.
Oh, wow.
Now, the version of Rock Around the Clock that they used on Happy Days was not the Decca version.
Right, not the original, right.
It was a sonnet version, which was recorded, I think, in 1968. But he still received, you know, performance royalties for that. Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's
cool. And then there's performance royalties. So he benefited from financially, and also it didn't hurt his fame, exposure to a younger generation, and then obviously would lead to more work for him. And so yeah, he worked throughout up until 76 when his saxophone player Rudy Pompelli died of cancer. He worked steadily up until then, and then he took a few years off after that and came back and toured some more last couple of years of his life. But I'm sure a lot of the work he got throughout the 70s was directly a result of the success and exposure through Happy Days.
Yeah, what a great show. I remember coming home as a kid watching it every day, and of course hearing your dad's song, you know, at the beginning of the show there, which was so awesome. Yeah. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, taking the time out to talk to me and Tom. Tom, any final thoughts for Bill Haley Jr.?
No, good luck with the upcoming shows, Bill, and thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your father's story. It really is inspiring.
Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank you for what you're doing, keeping the music alive and talking about these things. So, music makes people happy, in this crazy world.
That's right.
We all need to just kind of let go of things and just enjoy the simple pleasures in life. And one of those is rock and roll.
Absolutely.
Right. Why do you think rock and roll keeps on going and going like it does?
Well, I think, particularly original rock and roll, it was intended for that purpose, to make people happy, to make them dance. My dad wanted to get kids dancing again.
Yeah.
They wanted this short, peppy, energetic, exciting. That's the nature. That's the formula. And so, human nature doesn't change. And so we're still going to, react to that drum beat, and that guitar solo. It's just going to make us happy. We don't know why. It's timeless. So
absolutely, music keeps on going. Well, thank you so much, Bill Haley Jr. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for joining us on the show. You're always welcome here at Celebrity Spotlight.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care. Have a fantastic night.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Tom Payton, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate
My
it.
pleasure, Jimmy.
Pleasure. Of course, I want to mention some of the listeners that are out there. Of course,
Sure.
Cindy, the producer, who is working real hard out there in Long Island. She sent me some of the listeners out there. Of course, Brad Siegel and Canarsie, Team Siegel. Hello. My buddy Michael Ziggy out there in Las Vegas. His dad, Tom. Thank you so much for listening. My mom in Canarsie, Brooklyn. Cindy, the producer, of course, over there. She's in Lake Ronkonkoma listening right now. Beryl Bellis in Virginia. So many great people that listen to the show every single week. I really appreciate it so much. And please join us next Monday. Debbie Campbell is going to be here. Of course, she is the daughter of Glenn Campbell. I met Glenn Campbell in Atlantic City back in the day, and Debbie evidently was there. We talked about that a little bit, but we'll talk to Debbie about her dad and all about her dad's career. So I'm looking forward to that.
That'll be great.
Yeah. I mean, she toured with him for a lot. How many years, Tom? I think 24.
Yeah, I think about 24 years she was with him.
24 years. So we're looking forward to that. That's going to be next Monday night, a Celebrity Spotlight with Debbie Campbell, the daughter of Glenn Campbell, will be here. So we'll find out all about the life of Glenn Campbell and all the growing up with him as a dad. So that should be interesting.
It will be.
All right. And also, I just want to mention that this past weekend I was over at the Chiller Show in New Jersey, and I got to hang out with Kent McCord, which was so awesome. Of course, I am such a big fan of Adam 12 and of course One Emergency and Greg Ned and of course Battlestar Galactica. But of course, Adam 12, I used to see him every day. I was a kid who used to watch that every day. So Ken McCord,
the famous Officer Reed.
Yep, Officer Jim Reed, actually. Yeah,
Jim Reed. Right.
So it was so fun seeing Kent McCord. I'd met him several times over the years, so always great to see him. And also Donna Prescow was there. Of course, she was in Saturday Night Fever. She was Annette. John Travolta is one of his girlfriends before he met the other girl and danced with her in the movie, of course. So anything new with you, Tom?
No, but I have a question for you, Jimmy. Having met Kent McCord, did he talk about like Martin Milner? I know Martin died probably 10, 11 years ago. Did they have a close relationship off screen?
I believe they did. I did not talk to him about that, but from everything I know about it, I believe that they did have a very close relationship. They were friends right up till the end.
Right.
But he, he talked a little bit about being on Dragnet. He talked a little bit about being on Adam 12 and, working on Dragnet and stuff like that. That I talked to him about just the other day, and he said, it was such a great experience for him.
Sure.
He loved it so much.
And Battlestar Galactica too, wasn't he on? Was he on?
Yep.
That
Yeah. He did some spots in there, which was pretty awesome. So yeah,
Did he do anything else after that, or did he kind of?
I see he does a lot of guest star stuff. I know a lot of guest star appearances on a lot of shows. He pops up here and there, but and of course, one of the greatest things he did, he was on Elvis's private football team because Elvis had a little football team. Yeah, and Elvis, when he was out in Hollywood, what he would do is he would get all these actors and they'd play football.
Football, really?
Wow. One of the members of the actors that he put together was Kent McCord. And sort of one of the very first time I met Kent, and we talked about that, playing football with Elvis, which was, he was so impressed that I knew that. But anyway, he said it was such a great time and Elvis was so fun to play with on the field and stuff, which was pretty cool.
I think I may have shared with you, Jimmy. I think I showed you a picture. Kent McCord, Martin Milner, and there were a whole bunch of other actors. I think John Wayne. I can't remember who else. They had they did a Christmas album. And all those guys sang together on the Christmas album. I don't know if it was successful but it just had a good group of guys. They're like 10
Oh,
or 20.
wow.
Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s.
That's pretty awesome. And before we go, I want to say congratulations to Chubby Checker. Of course, I met Chubby Checker quite a few times. And it's about time that they're actually going to put him in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which
it took a long time. I'm glad he finally got in there.
Yeah, I got to hang out with him a few times. Chubby's such a great guy, and he so well deserved. I'm so happy for him. So finally,
and Cyndi Lauper too. Cyndi Lauper got in.
Cyndi Lauper. I met Cyndi Lauper back in the day when I think after my PLJ days, but I hung out with Cyndi. But yeah, so. It's so awesome for her to finally get in there as well. She's so well deserved as well,
Yeah,
she's a great person. But anyway, thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate it so much. Again, Tom Payton, thanks for being on the show.
Jimmy. Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. Please join us, and everybody have a fantastic week and a great
Good night, everybody. Have a good week.
And we will check you out next Monday with Debbie Campbell right here on Celebrity Spotlight.